Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Ojibwe, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Carrie Linklater, and I am the chairperson this morning. I'm joined via Zoom by Ms. Gail Anderson and Ms. Linda McFadden. Our city secretary this morning is Mrs. Crystal Harland, and our city assessor is Mr. Matthew Barakas. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by City Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the Board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the Board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the Board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. And as information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. This morning, we will be hearing items 1 through 8 on our docket. And Mrs. Harland, if you would please affirm the assessors and the applicant's testimony.
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Assessor, would you please state your full name?
Matthew Barakas.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. McKint, would you please state your full name?
Farrah Cates.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you, Mrs. Harland. Good morning, Ms. Cates and Mr. Barakas.
Morning.
We've got eight items on our docket this morning. We'll be starting at the top at number 1, which is 579 Broadway, and we are looking at assessed value. And Mr. Barakas, whenever you are ready to begin.
All right, thank you very much. File 24-2539, roll number 1209-1219-000, 579 Broadway. Assessed value is $1,750,000. Actual year built 1948. Effective year build 1978. Number of suites 21. No parking other than one outdoor parking spot. Page 2 shows the request for income information. Has been pretty good on this property. Subject sale history shows one sale in 2009 for $735,000. It's 11 bachelor, 11 one bedroom for 22 units. $730.10 on the rent. On this one, actually, the applicant's NOI is higher than ours, so it's predominantly a cap rate discussion, which is mostly what we're dealing with today, so it shouldn't take too long. I'll tailor my presentation in that regard. It's got a 5.15 cap. It's only 79, 545 market value per suite. And comes that is how the estimated market value is calculated. We've got our rent comparables that because the applicant's NOI is higher, I'm not going to belabor the point. Cap rate evidence that we've all seen before is on page 5. Again, not meant to be site specific, just to substantiate the model rates. So it ranges from 3.5 up to 5 3/4. These are sales that got 3 years, stabilization, no oddball years, no years missing, no associated sales, no sales for renovation, purchase for renovating. So these are the good ones. I looked through them all, and this is what I found that were good. So on page 6, this is the cap rate table you've all seen before. Page 7 is MEDIAC excerpts, and then we've got some permits here. On page 8, there was one that was taken out in April. They established 2 new suites in the basement. And then in 2010, they redid the existing apartment block, painting, replacing windows, refinishing hardwood floors, kitchen floors, new cupboards. Spent over $100,000 on it. So they spent a bunch of money fixing the place up. And this is just an ad from online I found. And there's a further description on page 12 that talks of its proximity to University of Winnipeg in regards to its suitability to renting to students there. I think it'd be a good investment for student housing, given the price of the rent and its proximity to the institution. And afterwards, there's photographs of the exterior and then also the interior. You can see that it's not the 40s in there anymore. Oh, and it looks like even though I didn't ask for it on the onset, there wasn't a compliance issue with this property in terms of us on page 17 and 18 handing in getting the mailer back, and that is substantiated on page 2, showing that for 2022 they didn't have the mailer in, so we got the registered mail, a record of them getting it delivered out in Halifax there. So,
but excuse me, Mr. Baracus, you're not asking for.
Yeah, no, I didn't put it on the brief, so just, to be fair, I'm not gonna ask for it, even though I should have, so just keep that in mind. So overall, it's been renovated as close to the University of Manitoba. It's only $79,000 per unit, and it's supported by cap rate sales in our table on page 5. That's my evidence.
Hi, thank you. And Ms. Cates, any questions?
Yes, thank you. So the property has all smaller suites and no parking. Would you agree that that could be less desirable to the market?
If it was not located so close to the University of Manitoba, then it would be a bigger issue. But because it would pull from that, group of people who might want to rent this place out, then I don't think it's that big of a deal.
Okay. And the permits appear to largely be related to interior upgrades, but would you agree that the structure of this property is 77 years old as of the date of the physical condition?
That is correct, yes.
And on your cap rate table on page 6, that range that you have 4.75 to 5.45. Do you know how many sales were included to get that range or the location of those properties?
I do not. I know there's sales on page 5 better because these are the ones I personally dug up.
Okay, and in regard to your sales, then on page 5, you don't provide the workups, correct? Just the final figures?
Just the final results.
Okay, thank you. That would conclude my questions, and then I also have some rebuttal when we get to that stage. Thank you.
All right, I thank you. And Ms. Anderson, questions?
Thank you. On page 5, the cap rate evidence that you have for the sales with the cap rates there, just wondering if in looking at these sales, if they have parking, can you point to any that don't have parking, or did you look at that?
Let me, because the thing is, like, I do have workups like for all of these. I'm just not allowed to put them in.
Okay.
So let me pull up my very large document. And I can go through them and tell you which ones have parking. I would assume most of them have some level of parking, and I'll be able to tell that by looking at the parking income. So, okay, so Sargent does have parking based on the income and expenses. The next one on Sargent also has parking. And as does Hendon. Young, I'm not seeing any income for parking, so I suppose Young does not have parking.
Okay.
Income for parking is not listed for boroughs. The very small parking income listed for 677 St. Mary's, but in 2018 they didn't list any. Sometimes they might lump the parking in with the other income as well. So it is a bit unclear in that regard. So, okay, on to the next one. McPhillips, I mean, it's not really relevant so much, but yes, it does have parking. The newer one, the Lady Joyce. St. Mary's does have parking as well, even though it's a very small number. Bertrand, I don't have any parking income listed on my workup. And then that's what I have in my my table. I know Arden and 555 Corden are from older cycles, and by the time I was told I was not allowed to put these workups in, I stopped creating this master document, so I don't have those two cells.
Okay, that was really helpful. Thank you very much for your presentation. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Barakis, this is
Carrie, you forgot me.
oh my gosh, I'm sorry, Linda.
It's okay.
Go ahead, please.
Sure. Mr. Barakis, you said in your presentation that this had an effective year date of 1978, but on your brief it says 1968. Which would it be?
Did I say 78? I can't
Pardon
remember.
me? Yeah, you said 1978.
Oh, it's 68. Maybe I just haven't enough coffee yet, but it's definitely 1968 on page 1.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. That's all my questions.
Thank you. So, Mr. Barakis, this is all model, correct?
Yes.
So you would agree that Winnipeg does not have is limited somewhat in transportation. We don't have a subway, correct?
Not that I know of.
We don't have a C train, correct?
Unfortunately not.
No, so we just have transit,
Yes.
city bus. So would you not agree that an investor looking at this building with no parking, that it would certainly limit potential investors in this property?
Well, I mean, it's also, I think it depends. That's a fair comment, but that would be more of a thing if you're like living out like in the suburbs. If you're kind of in the West Broadway, U of W, downtown Osborne Village, where the demographic that would go towards and be attracted towards the rent level and the lifestyle kind of that area entails, catching a train around Winnipeg is not as important in our mind. And if you look at the sales on page 5, we've got caps, you know, on Sargent Avenue and, you know, the 4 range, Bertrand. So, I mean, Winnipeg's not that big, but yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to stop you there. You don't think Winnipeg is that big?
Well, compared to
We're almost
maybe-
900. Anyway,
No,
all right.
okay. I don't know what you're trying to get me to say here, but I'm just saying
No.
that like the people who are in this location, they're students and, you know, they want to live in Osborne Village and West Broadway and Wolseley.
Okay, so you keep referring to U of W and the students. Have you looked at the rent roll? Do you know that the people occupying this building are students?
No, I'm not presenting any names here.
No. Okay. Thank you. Just one last question. This building has 21 suites, correct? That's what you have in your evidence, I believe.
Yeah, but we have, for some reason, we have 22 on page 3. So
Okay. And half these suites are bachelor and half are 1 bedroom.
yeah.
Correct. So again, would that not sort of deter an investor in this property? Bachelors rent for less, as do 1 bedrooms. Bachelors are less desirable. Smaller suites.
Again, it depends on the area you're in. If you're, you know, adjacent to the University of Manitoba and Osborne Village might be like where a single person lives when they first move out, it's not a factor at all.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Baracus. Ms. Cates, if you would like to give us your brief.
Thank you. So if you turn to page 2, we have a summary of some of the facts of the property, as well as our requested assessment of $1,568,000. On page 6, we have some property maps. So we have an aerial map view and then a Google map view of the location. And then some exterior photos on page 7. Property description on page 8. So the subject property is on the north side of Broadway, west of Balmoral in the West Broadway area. It is 2.5 stories, built in the 40s with an effective age assigned. And we have 22 units, including 11 bachelors and 11 1-bedrooms. And there doesn't appear to be any parking. If you go to page 13, we have the overview of our income approach. So we are applying potential market gross rents of $227,196 or $861 per unit per month, based on the actual income reported for the property. We note that the property has experienced above market vacancy, 12.8% in 2020, 16.7% in 2021, and 12% in 2022. So based on this, we are applying a higher vacancy rate to better reflect of 7.5%. And we have reviewed the actual expenses, and we are applying expenses of $123,042 or 57.7% of effective gross income. On page 14, we have the overview of our cap rate. So we are disputing the current cap rate in place. We are applying a cap rate of 5.75% based on our cap rate study. The property is wood frame, no amenities, which would be pretty standard for when it was built. I would consider the condition probably somewhere between average to good. So condition is not a factor. And then in terms of West Broadway, this would be a lower socioeconomic area. We're not making a location adjustment for the majority of the properties that we have today in West Broadway, but it is worth noting that West Broadway is typically characterized by rentals that operate on the lower end of the market. There tends to be more transiency in terms of lots of turnover, bad debt at these properties. And as well, like there does tend to be certain levels of crime and overall nuisance kind of behavior. So on page 16, we have our income and expense breakdown. So we have, we stabilize income based on the most recent year. We have an effective gross income of $213,239. We have 3 years of expense data. Typically, expenses would be stabilized based on the most recent year, as most expenses are seen to continue to increase over time. But for expenses that are known to fluctuate a bit more, such as professional fees, office supplies, those would be averaged in order to mitigate some of those fluctuations. So our expenses include stabilized repair and maintenance at $1,235 per suite. That would be on the low end, but that is what they are reporting. So we have our total expenses of $123,042 with a NOI of $90,196 with a 5.75% cap rate, gives the indicated value of $1,569,000 rounded. So I also submitted a cap rate study for apartments. I know everyone's heard it a bunch, so I'll just do a very high level of the cap rate study. So for our cap rates, essentially the idea is to stabilize the previous financials into a single year income expectancy, whether that be looking at multiple years or using the year leading up to the sale. So in regard to how we look at cap rates, we try to get into the mindset of the purchaser and what the income stream they would expect to be purchasing. That involves the principle of anticipation, and it has to go beyond just kind of a data entry of pure historicals. So we also know that the city's ranges for cap rates go all the way up to 7.95%. The brokers for low-rise properties are predominantly saying 5 to 6 or 5 to 5.75. So realistically, older properties with less economic life should probably be on the higher end of the spectrums. And then in terms of site specific for cap rates, we will look at various factors to potentially do adjustments. So the majority of the properties today, we're not doing adjustments, but we do have some social housing properties later on in the docket. So those would be considered an adjustment under durability and quality of income. And then we have a variety of cap rates that we've calculated. We have 677 Maryland, which is in a similar location at around a 7%. And then we've provided all the calculations for your review. And so just to tie this presentation together, we have an appendix starting on page 19 of the main brief. I've included some marketing photos. They were snipped from a video, so it may be a little blurred. And then we've also included the financials that we've reviewed. And that would conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cates. And Mr. Barakas, any questions?
I do not. I just have a rebuttal for the cap rate.
All right.
That's it. So no questions.
All right, thank you. And Ms. McFadden, any questions?
Ms. Cates, on your vacancy, if this is in fact catering to a student population, and I know that's a bit of a question, but would you not think that the vacancy rate would be affected by COVID quite considerably? And I note that it was 12.8 in 2020. 2021 would be when the biggest effects on vacancy would have been felt, I would expect, and then it's going back up. So would you expect that this vacancy rate would continue to be high over time?
I think for this specific property, it's not clear that it's purely students renting. And I know this owner group who has other properties around this location in Winnipeg, they have said that the properties had a lot more vacancy than they were expecting, more due to market factors. So I would expect an above market vacancy rate to likely continue. Even if it comes down a little bit from 12 to, let's say, 8, that would still be a lot higher than what the city would report for market vacancy in like the 3 to 4% range. So I think an above market vacancy is still warranted for the property, but I would agree with your point that if it is students, then COVID could be in effect, but I'm not clear that this is purely for students. I think this is kind of a variety of tenants at these properties.
Thank you. That's all my question.
Thank you. And Ms. Anderson,
I have no questions, thank you.
thank you. I also have no questions. And so both parties have rebuttal.
Yes.
All right. Mr. Baracus, have you submitted your rebuttal?
Yeah, I submitted it this morning.
Madam Chair, both parties' rebuttal are in your OneDrive file.
All right. I'm just gonna.
And I'll send the rebuttal to the applicant as well.
Okay.
Internet access. You don't have to-
I'll need to print it for the applicant, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you. Did you want to take a recess? I'm sorry?
May we take a break?
Yes.
Okay, I'll go take us offline and then I'll come back and print the rebuttal evidence.
Thank you, Mrs. Harland. I would like to call this hearing back to order. And I believe we are going to be hearing some rebuttal. And Mr. Baracus, if you would like to present your rebuttal, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me bring this up. So we've got 2 files. The first file is one you've seen before. So the first 4 sales basically either have only 1 year of income expense information stabilized. That's 1 to 3. And sale 4 does not have any actual income and expenses. So they just came up with a cap rate. As we scroll through to page 2, you can see it's only 1 year. I don't know how you could, it's only 1 year. Stabilizing to me means looking at more than 1 year and then deciding on what figure to put in the stabilized column. Furthermore, they opt to use a different income, often from a real estate ad or a CMHC report, rather than the actuals, which has a drastic effect on the cap rate in their stabilized column. So that's consistent on page 7, 8, or sorry, let me go up here. Page 2, see that again on page 4, where the income that they used to stabilize jumped about 130,000. And then on page 6 as well. And one thing you'll notice about page 6, before we open the next document, is they report the real estate taxes at $3,020 for a property of a sale price of $1,800,000. You know, $3,000. That's like a what a bungalow in West Kildonan has for taxes. That's not the actual taxes. So when you change it to the actual taxes, the cap rate drops to 4.5. I know we've heard all year how caps in the 4 don't exist. But when you correct this sale, which not for nothing, I wouldn't use because it's only 1 year. But I think it's important to note that when you actually correct taxes, cap drops to 4.5, and we're going to open that document right away. 100 Maryland on page 9, no actual data. And then less relevant for today's conversation is 22.9 McPhillips. I'm not going to belabor the point. Document 2 is the Word document. You could open that up, please. And you'll see when you look, the taxes are actually 15,674. So that's for 738 St. Mary's. When you change that one number, you scroll to the second page of the Word document, drops the cap to 4.5. So when you correct the number, that's what it is. That's my rebuttal.
Thank you, Mr. Barakas. Any questions, Ms. Cates?
Yes, thank you. So for sales 1 to 3 that you say are unusable based on 1 year of data, when you say unusable, that would be yours or the assessment department's opinion, correct? That's not based on appraisal theory or IWO standards.
I mean, I know from my schooling that they wouldn't be accepting 1 year of information for a cap rate sale. I don't know what the standard is. I don't have it in my brief, but also there's the issues with the sales are compounded with the fact that the effective gross income in the stabilized column is drastically different than what they actually reported. So I wouldn't go for any of those sales 1 to 4.
Okay, and then sale for 100 Maryland, those parameters that were used, they're like, that would be similar to how the city would assess a new apartment, would it not? Like looking to market information for the rents and vacancy, an expense ratio, you know, within a certain range.
Yeah, but I wouldn't quote the city's workups as like site specific cap rate sales. But you to your point, that is a fair comment.
Okay. I think that would conclude my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Anderson, any questions for the assessor?
I have no questions. Thank you.
And Ms. McFadden?
I have no questions either.
I also have no questions. And Ms. Cates, if you would like to proceed with your rebuttal.
Thank you. So if you turn to page 4, there's some discussion on 727 Sargent and 241 Young. These cap rates are quite low, 3.46, 4.21%. We don't have the workups or the backup data to see how those were calculated. And additionally, when we see such low cap rates in the Winnipeg market, it typically points to the idea that they were purchasing a different income stream, not necessarily the one in place historically. 459 Sargent, we've offered an alternate stabilization. The market information that would have been available to the purchaser suggested a higher level of rents, but still on the low end, $740 per unit per month, $40 per month parking. And when we recalculate, as shown on page 5, we get a 5.79%, which makes more sense considering the location and type of the property. On page 7, we've also restabilized 150 Hendon. City has this calculated at a 4.01%, but we had the opportunity to interview the purchaser, and they stated that they were aware that the vendor had applied for RTV increases, so they were not purchasing the income in place. They were anticipating a higher level of income. And then the year later, when they were operating it for a full year, they actually achieved something pretty similar. So it further illustrates the point that they weren't purchasing the historical in place. That restabilized at a 5.42% as shown on page 8. And then if we skip ahead to page 22, Page 22, 677 Maryland, the city is using the older sale in 2020 when there is a sale approaching the reference date in 2023, which would be more accurate to use. And then 700 St. Mary's, 32 Arden, information we found from the property manager as well as online indicated that there could be intent to renovate on those properties when they were purchased. And that would conclude my rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Barakas, questions?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Anderson
I have no questions. Thank you.
and Ms. McFadden.
No questions. Thank you.
I also have no questions. Does either party have a wish for a summation?
I'm okay, thank you.
I'm good as well. Thank you.
All right. So that concludes our first item. We will then move on to item number 2, which is 195 Yonge Street. Again, we are looking at assessed value here, and Mr. Barakas, whenever you're ready to proceed.
Okay. File 24-3032, roll number 12091074000195 195 Young. Manitoba Housing Property 1977, no effective year built. 4,604,000, 12 stories, 70 suites, 36 outdoor parking spots. No subject sale history. Page 2, you can see on page 3. We've got 70 suites, 30 of them are bachelor, 40 of them are 2-bedroom. We've got a market value per suite of 65,000, so pretty low, 5.5 cap as per the model. Average monthly rent is $742.51. Glancing ahead, it's a cap rate issue. Looking at the applicant's brief, so I'll streamline my presentation. Rent comparables are found on page 4. I did a CMHC market rent analysis as well. We're only about 70% here of the overall calculated market rent using Midland, the year built bracket, and the unit count range. So we've got this pegged down in our system to account for the fact that it's Manitoba Housing, and typically the finishings of the physical asset are more utilitarian in nature. Cap rate sales that we just went over are on page 8. I mean, the CMHC source tables are on page 7. Cap rate chart on page 9, and then this hasn't been any recent big permits on page 11. There was a permit for 628,000, but that's about 25 years ago. Retrofitting the 11-story apartment building, removing the windows were replaced then, removing of the exterior cladding, new air barrier insulation. So they did some more structural type capital work, but that was 25 years ago. We got the pictures from the street view on Google, and that's the balance of my presentation. So again, 65,000 per unit, not very high. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Barakas. Questions, Ms. Cates?
Yes, thank you. So for your income value summary on page 3, is the model valuing the property as if it were social housing or as if it's a market apartment on the low end of the rental range?
Market apartment, because social housing isn't the highest and best use, given that it operates at a loss. If we were to value these things as social housing because they break even without government subsidy, many of them would be around 0. So we value them as what they would sell to a for-profit purchaser looking to make money and running it on a maximally financially profitable basis. So yeah, not considering the social housing, but understanding the physical asset is probably utilitarian in nature based on its use.
Okay. And I think you mentioned it during your presentation, but to clarify, I guess, you agree that it makes sense that the rents would be below the CMHC averages, given that the averages could be including newer properties or renovated properties, and these are very basic finishes.
Yeah, like we don't have any permits. What the thing about housing is they're pretty good about taking permits out. So if they were doing bigger renos, there'd be a record of that. And I'm not seeing that on this property. So, I mean, we got these pegged down in our model to account for the assumption that they're more utilitarian in nature.
Okay, thank you. That would conclude my questions.
Thank you. And Ms. McFadden, any questions?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Anderson?
I have no questions. Thank you.
I also have no questions. Ms. Cates, if you would like to proceed.
Thank you. So if you turn to page 2, we have our requested assessment of $4,220,000. On page 6, we have property maps. And then some exterior photos on page 7 and 8. Property description on page 9. The subject property is on the east side of Yonge, north of Broadway in West Broadway. It is 12 stories, built in the late 70s. There are 70 units and 36 parking stalls noted. On page 14, we have the overview of our income approach. So given that the property is social housing, it operates on a rent geared to income basis, meaning people are paying what they can based on a proportion of their income, and the rents are not at market. So given that we know that the city's rents typically are pulling from a proportion of CMHC, we're not disputing the rents of $623,624 or $742 per unit per month. The rents should be below the CMHC averages, given that they are basic utility grade finishes. For vacancy, these properties don't typically experience market vacancy, so we are applying a market rate of 3.6%. And for expenses, we are also applying $347,960 or 57.9% of EGI. On page 15 and 16, we have an overview of our approach for cap rates to social housing. So from the Appraisal Institute text, Valuation and Market Studies for Affordable Housing, they state that to come up with a cap rate for social housing, we should start at a market rate and then adjust upwards for risk factors. These properties don't typically transact in the market, and when they do, they tend to have a lot of atypical conditions associated. So this is why we would take this approach. So in terms of factors to adjust for, they could be put into 4 broad categories: low cost construction, advanced age, declining neighborhood, and low income tenancy. So when we look to low income tenancy, we have a description on page 17 and 18. The idea is its link with deferred maintenance. These properties do not earn enough operating revenues to cover their operating expenses, and they rely on funding to maintain their operations. But what ends up being neglected is those preventative repair and maintenance items that market apartments would typically receive. And so what happens is issues will escalate over time. And it's not uncommon for these properties to have millions of dollars of deferred maintenance, deferred capital required. So on page 19, we have our cap rate for the subject. We are applying a cap rate of 6%. Our base cap rate that would consider a good quality property in a good location would be 5.5%. And given that the property is social housing, has low income tenancy, and additionally, we were able to review a building condition assessment. They're stating 2.7 million in short-term capital work required. That's in the appendix. So a 0.5% premium, especially given that it has only 0.5 parking stalls per unit, I think makes sense for the property and would be considered a modest adjustment. So on page 21, we have our income and expense breakdown. So we're using a net operating income of $253,214 with a 6% cap rate, gives an indicated value of $4,220,000. Appendix starts on page 23. I've included the building condition assessment, as well as some additional text on social housing that we've utilized in the brief. And that would conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cates. Questions, Mr. Barakas?
I do not have any questions, thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Anderson, questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
And Ms. McFadden?
I have no questions.
Thank you. I also have no questions. Does either party have a wish for a summation on the property?
I do not.
I'm good as well, thank you.
All right. I thank you both. We will move on to item number 3, which is 221 Colony Street. Again, we are looking at assessed value for this property. And Mr. Barakas, whenever you're ready to proceed.
All right, file number 24-1562, roll number 12091492000221 Colony. Assessed value $2,164,1927. We don't have an effective year built on it. 29 suites, only 1 outdoor parking spot, so effectively no parking on the site. There's been no issues with requests, getting the request for income information. And I guess there were some sales, but I guess one of them was post-reference at $2,000,003, so can't consider that. Income value summary on page 3 shows 14 bachelor, 15 1-bedroom, 29 units total, 715 49 on the rent, and we've got a 5.3 cap. Comes up to 2,164,000, 74,620 per unit. Rent comps are found on page 4. They also are bachelor and 1-bedroom units predominantly, and the rent assigned by the model to the subject property is in line with the reported rents of the comparables in the area. Cap stuff on page 5 and 6. Page 8, they did some fire repairs to a couple of units. I guess there was a fire there. That was back in 2011. And then we've got a description of the property on page 9. Yeah, in regards to like the amenities that are within walking distance to it. So like Colony in York. Then we've got some pictures on the inside. So I mean, it looks like it's been upkept, but it certainly hasn't been, I wouldn't consider this renovated by any stretch of the imagination. Like you look at the sink fixture, looks pretty old. Countertop and cabinets. So someone buying this might actually be looking at it as a renovation opportunity, but that's not what we're valuing. And then we have the income and expense statement and rent roll. That is the balance of my brief. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barakas. And Ms. Cates, any questions?
No questions, but I would just like to object to the assessor presenting the post-reference sale in his verbal presentation. Thank you.
And thank you. Duly noted, and we will not be considering it. Thank you. Ms. Anderson, any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
And Ms. McFadden.
Mr. Barakas, you believe that this 100-year-old building would be within 80% of all other buildings vis-a-vis the cap rate? So 20% of buildings would have a higher, only 20% of buildings would have a higher cap rate than this 100-year-old building.
Sorry. So it's within, like, it looks to be, it's like within the range here
Sure.
of the.
Sure, it's
between the 20th
within 80%, right? It's within the 80th percentile.
Yeah, yeah.
So only 20% of buildings would be a higher cap rate than a 100-year-old building. Do we have very many older buildings in this?
Yeah, there's older buildings, but there's more than just the age that goes into the cap rate calculation. There's the area, the size. And with the size, it being a smaller size, there is the ability for the non-institutional investor to get in on the bidding action. So yeah, well, your comment about the age is a fair one, but there's also other ingredients that go into the recipe, so to speak.
Including parking, which this building doesn't have.
Yeah, and again, this West Broadway area, as opposed to the suburbs where it's more car dependent, there's more single people living that are attracted to this area, just knowing the character of the area, having lived in the area. Not everyone has a car. So well, the comment is valid, but it's, again, this is not South St. Vital. This is like West Broadway, Osborne, U of W.
I suspect there aren't too many 100-year-old buildings in South St. Vital.
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McFadden. Mr. Barakis, I just have one question. I just find it unusual that on your brief that this is for 1927, and it's the effective age also. So that leads me to think, has it not been inspected to be updated in regards to its effective age?
No, let me look it up. I know I haven't inspected it based on the schedule that's been imposed on us. So I can look up, see if someone's been there recently. I mean, I know what it's worth in 2024, but I mean, that's not what we're talking about, right?
Okay.
I'm looking up to see the inspection. Hang on, I'll get an answer.
Okay.
We don't have any. Yeah, we don't have a recent inspection on the property. So all I can go by is the pictures, and the pictures show that doesn't look like too much has been done to it, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. All right. I thank you. Ms. Cates, if you to proceed with your brief.
Yeah. So if you turn to page 2, we have our requested assessment of $1,744,000. On page 6, we have the property site maps. And then on page 7, some exterior photos. Property description on page 8. So the subject is on the east side of Colony, south of York in the West Broadway area. It is a 3.5-story building built in the 1920s with 29 units and no parking. On page 13, we have the overview of our income approach. So we are applying effective gross rents of $228,322 based on the actual stabilized income of the subject. The way that the reporting is done for this property is it already accounts for vacancy. So we're not applying any additional vacancy allowances. It's already accounted for. And for expenses, we are applying an expense allowance of $121,625 or 52.7% of EGI. For our cap rate on page 14, we are applying a cap rate of 6.25%. The property structurally is almost 100 years old. That would put it within our range of 6.1 to 6.6%. I'm just going toward the lower end of the range at 6.25. On page 16, we have our income and expense breakdown. So items in red are not being used in the valuation. So with our effective gross income and our expenses, we have a net operating income of $109,003 with a 6.25% cap rate, gives an indicated value of $1,744,000 rounded. We have the repair and maintenance breakdown, 5 years of stabilized data on page 17 for your review. The repair and maintenance is $1,349 a unit, which would be on the lower end, but that is what they're investing into the property. And then we have an appendix starting on page 19. I've included the marketing photos that were available. So given that they're marketing photos, this would tell me that this is probably one of the better units at the property. And then I've also included the valuation as well as the financials that we've looked at. And that would conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Barakas, any questions?
I do not.
Thank you. And Ms. McFadden?
I have no questions either. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Anderson?
I have no questions. Thank you.
I also have no questions. Does either party have a wish for summation?
No, thanks.
I'm good as well. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both. We will then move on to item number 4, 196 Colony Street. And Mr. Barakas, whenever you're ready to proceed.
Okay. File 24-1707. Roll number 120916040000, 196 Colony Street. 4,702,000. Built in 2023, 25 suites, got 9 parking spots. They've been good with their request for income information. 15 1-bedroom, 5 2-bedroom, 5 3-bedroom, 4 3/4 on the cap rate, as it's a newer property. 188,000 per unit for the 4.7 estimated market value. Again, speeding things along, unless anything's changed, it's just a cap rate discussion. So the rent comps are found on page 4. On page 5, because this is a newer one. Now, I'm not saying these are directly comparable in any way, other than the age and probably level of finish, but these are some of the sales of newer properties as advertised the Winnipeg Real Estate Board. These ones did not go through land titles. These are share sales. So the first one is a townhouse development, so I wouldn't really consider that one at all. But Urban Square and 30 University here, they sold, around upwards of 260 a unit for newer ones. Now these ones would have amenities. They might have like gyms. So it's not Colony Street, but I mean, we're only at 188 per unit. And we got the 4 3/4 cap, which is similar to 2390 McPhillips. So I think when you're looking at the overall result of the assessment at 188 per unit, I think we're pretty darn reasonable. Got the permit here on page 9. 4.5 million to build. We're at 4.7 when you consider the land is worth something. That also is secondary evidence towards the overall valuation of the property. And then we've got some pictures here on page 10. Showing the exterior of the building, got some balconies. So they built an apartment here. So it's, I mean, the area is not obviously that bad if the investors are buying property and building brand new apartments. The lots So located in the heart of West Broadway, many different floor plans, underground and heated parking, car share, storage locker, secure bike storage. And then a further description, quartz countertops, etc. Shows the nearby amenities, so it's like the downtown. And then some pictures of the units, so. That would be my presentation, thank you.
Thank you. Questions, Ms. Cates?
Yes, thank you. So in regard to the sales on page 5, Urban Square has predominantly larger units, like it's mostly 2 and 3 bedrooms. So that would result in a higher per unit value. Would you agree?
Larger units, I'm not sure the unit size. I know it's on 230 Good Street, so it is like in the downtown area as well. But I mean, it's 80,000 more per unit, so I guess that plays into a factor there.
Okay, so you agree that the unit size is a factor?
Well, yeah, I mean, all things considered, a larger unit's gonna rent for more. I don't have the unit size of this building, but if that's what you're saying, and if that is the case, then it does make sense that this one has a higher value per unit, but that's quite a higher value per unit. We're only up like 190. That one sold for almost 270 per unit.
Okay, and then UC 30 would be a completely different and arguably more desirable area being near U of M. Would you agree with that or not?
This one's near, that one's near U of M, this one's near U of W. So, I mean, it's kind of like, where did you sign up for school?
But U of M would be a more desirable university in terms of international students and other students that would be looking for rentals, whereas U of W would probably be appealing to more of a local market, would it not?
I don't have the demographics of the universities.
Okay. And then final question, just regard to your comments on the permit. Would you agree that cost doesn't necessarily equal value?
No, but I mean, like during a full-on appraisal, like often the 3 approaches of value are done. But I mean, it's just a secondary indicator, but we're doing the income approach here, not the cost approach. Value by the cost approach might be even higher, but that's not what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. That would conclude my questions.
I thank you. Ms. Anderson, any questions?
I have no questions, thank you.
And Ms. McFadden?
I don't have any question.
Thank you. So Mr. Baracus, I just have one question. It's in regards to the parking. So this has 25 suites with only 9 parking spots?
That's what we have on record, yes.
Okay. Would you not agree that's a little unusual for a new build? This looks like a fairly, just given the pictures, a very nice building.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
it would be attracting people with a higher income who I'm thinking would have a car. So I'm just wondering if the limited parking, if that's not a factor.
I mean, that's what they have on that, maybe because it's kind of like a long and tall building, maybe that's all they can fit in there. Park on the street.
All right. I thank you. Ms. Cates, if you would like to proceed with your brief.
Thank you. So if you turn to page 2, we have our requested assessment of $4,254,000. On page 4, just under scope of work, this property did have a site visit by a member of our office, which included interior and exterior inspection. And so I've provided the photos in my appendix. On page 6, we have the property maps. And then an exterior photo on page 7. Page 8, property description. So the subject property is on the west side of Colony, north of Broadway in West Broadway. The property is 6 stories, built in 23 with 25 units. And limited parking, I had 10 parking stalls noted. On page 13, we have the overview of our income approach. So given the timelines of the reference date for this assessment and when the property was completed, we only have very sparse expense data in 2022, and it's not going to be reflective of the property's operation as a multifamily building. So given that, we're not disputing the NOI in place, as the figures for rent, vacancy, and expenses look within the range of what we would expect for a new apartment. On page 14, we have our cap rate for the subject property. So typically for new apartments, we would be applying somewhere between 5 and 5.25%, more often 5% when there's a lot of amenities, things like that. For this property, I'm applying a slightly higher cap rate, 5.25%. In our view, West Broadway would be a less desirable location for new builds compared to more suburban locations, and additionally, with lack of parking at the property, I think a slight increase in the cap rate would make sense for this one. On page 16, so we have an NOI of $223,348 with a 5.25% cap rate, is an indicated value of $4,254,000 rounded. We have the appendix starting on page 18, and then there's some of the interior photos for your review of the units and the common area. And I included the 2022 financials as well, even though they are quite sparse. And that would conclude my presentation. Thank you.
I thank you. And questions, Mr. Barakas?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Anderson?
I have no questions. Thank you.
And Ms. McFadden?
I have no question.
I also have no questions. Does either party have a wish for a summation on the property?
No, thanks. Just a quick break after this one, please.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. And Ms. Cates, you're fine with no summation?
Yes, thank you.
All right. This time we're going to take a 10-minute break. Mrs. Harland, if you could take us offline, please.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Harland. I would like to call this hearing back to order. And we are going to be moving on to item number 5, which is 29 Balmoral Street. Again, we are looking at assessed value of this property. And Mr. Barakas, whenever you're ready to proceed.
File 24-2763, 1209140000. 29 Balmoral, Manitoba housing property, assessed value $3,395,000, 1988. 40 suites, 32 outdoor parking spots. Looking at what I've got in the notes, looks like it's just a cap rate issue. 24 one bedroom, 16 two bedroom, 40 spots in total. $854.97 is the rent. We got a 5.2 cap. It's only $84,875. It's the part of Balmoral that is like close. It's like basically Wolseley. Follow along the Granite Club and go south. Property actually backs onto the river, so it's not like on the other side of Portage or anything like that. It's more akin to Wolseley, in my opinion. Got our cap rate stuff on page 8. We're only 80% of the market rents. to account for the assumption that it is more utilitarian in nature. And then on page 11, we got a permit from 2021. There's some work to the tune of 1.3 million, replacing some doors and constructing a new retaining wall, reconstructing some stairs, duct cleaning, decommissioning of interior garbage chutes, resurfacing the existing barrier-free ramp, reconstruction of the existing front entrance walkway, east side walkway. So the mechanical and electrical work I included. So they put a bunch of money into their investment. New HRV on the next page, a permit for that, 273,000. Then we got the picture of the property there on page 13. And then the exterior photos, and then from the end of I guess that would be Spence looking back at the apartment. You can see how it backs onto the river there. So overall, pretty desirable neighborhood. If you got the chance, get on your bike, go for a bike ride around there, down Wolseley. That's my evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baracus. Questions, Ms. Cates?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. McFadden
I have no questions. Thank you.
and Ms. Anderson.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Mr. Baracus, I just have one question. I'm going to assume that your brief is model driven.
That's correct.
All right, I thank you. Ms. Cates, if you would like to proceed with your brief.
Thank you. So if you turn to page 2, we have our requested assessment of $3,071,000. We have property maps on page 6. And then some exterior photos on page 7. Property description on page 8. So the property is on the south side of Balmoral, west of Osborne, in the West Broadway area. It is 5 stories, built in the late 80s, 40 units and 32 parking stalls. And the property is Assiniboine adjacent. If you turn to page 13, we have the overview of our income approach. So we are not disputing the NOI. We have the cap rates for social housing on pages 14 through 17. And then if you turn to page 18, we are applying a 5.75% cap rate. Our base cap rate will be 5.5%, and we're applying a 0.25% adjustment. We're only adding a small adjustment to the property to account for the fact that, at least in part, the deferred maintenance is being addressed at the property in recent years. So if you turn to page 20, we have a net operating income of $176,562 with a 5.75% cap rate, gives an indicated value of $3,071,000 rounded. We have the appendix on page 22, and it's just including the valuation as well as some more information on social housing. And that would conclude my presentation. Thank you.
I thank you. Questions, Mr. Baracus?
Have you inspected the property?
I have not.
Just on page 18, maybe some clarification. What did you add the premium for on your cap rate?
Given that it's social housing, but a smaller premium than previous to account for the newer age and then some of the work that's been done.
But if it was sold on a for-profit basis, it wouldn't be sold as social housing. It would be sold to make money, would it not?
If it's sold on a for-profit basis per the scenario, then it would be sold to make money. But given that the property has only ever operated as social housing, yes, they did some work, $1 million, but these properties typically have multi-million dollars in work that's required. So to not account for that at all, yes, even if it changes ownership, all of that deferred capital then still needs to be done by someone. A for-profit purchaser, I don't believe, can just purchase it and rent it out at these higher rent levels tomorrow without putting in that work. So we believe it should be accounted for.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
I thank you. And Ms. Anderson
I have no questions. Thank you.
and Ms. McFadden.
I have no questions. Thank you.
All right. I also have no questions. Does either party have a wish for a summation?
I'm okay, thanks.
Ms.
Good as well, thank you.
All right. I thank you both on that. We will move on to item number 6 on our docket, which is 190 Balmoral. Again, we are looking at assessed value on this property. And Mr. Brackus, whenever you'd like to proceed.
All right, one moment, just let me pull this up here. All right. 24-2078, roll number 1209-1267000, 190 Balmoral Street. Assessed value is 1.713 million, 1924 and 1970 effective age on it, 18 suites, no parking spots. Request for income information has been good. Got a few sales, but these are obviously much older, so I didn't put any weight on them. So just looking ahead, the applicant's NOI is actually higher than ours, so it's predominantly like a cap rate issue. We're looking at reduction. So 4 bachelor, 14 1-bed. Average monthly rent is $817.97. And then we've got a 5.05 cap, 95,166 per suite. Got our comps on page 4. So looking for, again, comparables in the area, we're at 817. The comparables range from 783 to 970. Cap rate stuff on 5 and 6. And then we've got a permit on page 8. 2011 interior alterations and repairs to the 3-story apartment building, 18 units. It doesn't give more detail than that, unfortunately. But we have pictures that follow, shows there's no vacancy at the place. From the online ads. And so it looks like, so there's been some window replacement. On page 11, the description is completely rehabilitated, modern stylish walk-up, on-site laundry, and then the rest, you can read over yourself there. Then we have some pictures here. The interior from the online ads, page 12 and onwards, show that they've done a bunch of work replacing the cabinets, no work here. This is where the effective age is coming from. Bathrooms have been redone. The hardwood floors may have been refinished as well. So then we've got the income and expense mailer on page 18. They're reporting 189,000 on income. We're assigning them 170, so we are low. So obviously that should be higher. But I'm not changing it. And then some rents. So, I mean, based on the fact that, well, I mean, it is a lower cap rate for sure. It does look like we're low on the rents. So all things considered, based on the condition of the property, no vacancy, seems to be in demand, 95,000 per unit. Not too bad. That's my evidence. Thank you.
I thank you. And Ms. Cates, any questions?
Yes, thank you. So your income value summary on page 3, would that be based on the effective age?
Yes, it would.
And in regard to the effective age, is it like when you're looking at an effective age, is it just like a subjective assessment of someone from the department putting an age on it rather than like inputs into a formula that calculates a remaining life of the property?
Yeah, so what it is like in tandem with like adjusting like the income quality, which will bump the expenses up and down. When a property is renovated, like often like the rents get boosted quite a bit. So putting an effective age on the property changes the rents. And when insofar as changing the effective age brings the rents up to what they're reporting post renovation, it also adjusts the cap rate to reflect the work that's been done as well. So, but it is subjective for sure, but it's meant to be in parallel with what they're reporting to us after the renovations took place.
Okay, but does it not seem like a bit of a big leap to go from 1924 to like 50 years newer?
Yeah, and I can hear where you're coming from that. And with these valuations, ultimately what we're looking at is the market value at the end of the day. I mean, we could talk about, okay, so maybe the cap seems like it's a bit low, but I'm not getting questioned on the rent, with the rent being too low as well. So when I look at this property, is it too high at 95,000 per unit? Could you get a condo in that area? Could you buy one for less than 100,000 in that condition? I don't think we could. Furthermore, they've got no vacancy either. So it seems like the place is in demand and it's successful. So I think based on the overall estimated market value, looking at it on a per suite basis, I think we're okay.
Okay. That would conclude my questions. Thank you.
I thank you. Ms. Anderson?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. McFadden?
Mr. Baracus, you're making it sound as though that effective age is based on cosmetic features. Would it not make more sense to have an effective age being changed because the actual structure has been updated so that the building would have a longer life? Is that not what an investor would be looking at as well?
Yeah, I mean, like if we're looking at like a effective age in like a true sense, then yeah, like if you're gonna like replace the foundation and redo insulation and whatnot.
I'm thinking, you know, a 1924 building is generally steam heat boilers, very low grade electrical type of things. So I question the cosmetic aspect of this.
Yeah, and again, like I haven't inspected it. I don't know if they've done mechanical, like we have that permit for 348,000, so they may have. But ultimately, I'm trying to, again, instead of like trying to like nitpick at all the ingredients, I'm looking at the overall result of the recipe here. And it's 95,000 per unit in a building with no vacancy. And despite the fact that it has no parking, and I've been questioned about parking today, and C trains and whatever. The fact that this place does not have parking, it's on Balmoral, but it's got no vacancy, and it's got quote unquote only cosmetic upgrades, it seems to be doing pretty darn good. So I think at $95,000 per unit, I think we're just fine.
Okay, thank you.
I thank you. Ms. Anderson, did you have questions? Did I ask? Sorry.
Yeah, you asked. I have no
I
questions.
did. All right.
Thanks.
I also have no questions. Ms. Cates, would you like to proceed with your brief?
Thank you. So if you turn to page 2, we have our requested assessment of $1,658,000. On page 4, under scope of work, a member of our office visited this property in August of 2020 for my notes. If you turn to page 6, we have our property maps. And then an exterior photo on page 7. Property description on page 8. So the subject is on the west side of Balmoral, north of Broadway in the West Broadway area. It's a 3.5-story building built in 1924 with an effective age that we are disputing. The subject property has 18 units and no parking. On page 13, we have our income overview. So we are applying an effective gross rent of $186,064 based on the actual income achieved by the property. And the vacancy is accounted for within the reporting already, so we're not adding an additional allowance. And for expenses, we are applying $85,567 or 45.2% of EGI based on their expenses reported. Page 14, we have our cap rate. So we are applying a cap rate based on the age of the property at 6.25%. As of the date of the physical condition, the property is 100 years old, and we acknowledge that the interiors had been renovated around the 2010s, but the permit data that we looked at doesn't really indicate any significant structural elements changing, which would actually alter the life of the property. On page 16, we have our income and expense breakdown. So we have a net operating income of $103,597 with a 6.25% cap rate, gives an indicated value of $1,658,000 rounded. R&M on page 17. And then the appendix starts on page 19, and I have some interior photos of the units and the common area. And then the financials that we looked at and a snip of the permits. And that would conclude my presentation. Thank you.
I thank you. Mr. Barakis, any questions?
Yes, just on page 28. Do these permits not show that there has been some plumbing and electrical work done to the property throughout its somewhat recent history?
Yes, I see plumbing and electrical, but given that the property is from the 1920s, those things would have to be upgraded. But I mean, the main permit you were referring to is the interiors, which I agree they invested funds to upgrade, but I don't see anything like significant aside from that.
And isn't it true on page 30 that they're reporting zero vacancy for the most recent year prior to the reference date?
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
All right, those are my questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Barakis. Any questions, Ms. Anderson?
I have no questions. Thank you.
And Mrs. McFadden, any questions?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cates, you stated that somebody from your office had inspected this property.
Yes.
Was there any information given on what type of foundation this building had?
No, I don't believe so. The photos were kind of the extent that I had in terms of information, more so on the finishes. Sometimes like things relating to the structure can be a bit beyond the scope of our inspections with the caretaker building, you know, whoever's taking us around. So no, I don't have any comments on that.
All right, I thank you. Does either party have a wish for a summation?
No, thank you.
I'm good as well, thank you.
All right, I thank you both. We will move on to item 7, which is 458 Balmoral. And Mr. Barakas, I see you have given a recommendation for this property.
Yes. So I'll read it in file 24-2132, roll number 13051998200. It's 458 Balmoral Street. The assessment was 4.745 million. I've made a reduction to 3.782 to better reflect market value. Go to page 5. You can see the calculations. So what I did is I took the average of my comparable rents that were on, let me see here, page 4, and condition is an issue with this property based on the photographs. And you'll see in the applicant's brief, and I believe I included in mine. And this property and the next one, because I haven't inspected the few years ago, 500 Balmoral. So when I look at the comps on page 4, bringing it back, there's actually a better suite mix and year built in the comps, but looking at the pictures you're going to see throughout the presentation of this property, you can see that this property is pretty beat up. So I feel lowering the rents makes sense. And also putting a bump on the cap to 5 3/4 at the same time. Now, I'm double counting here, but I just think that the cap should be higher for that particular part of Balmoral. I haven't driven past there a lot. So that changes the assessment to 3,782,000. I'll pause there and then I will keep going after the applicant response.
All right, thank you, Mr. Barakas. Ms. Cates, are you willing to accept the recommendation?
I think we're still a bit far apart on the cap rate, so I would like to proceed. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Barakas, if you would like to proceed with your brief then, please.
For sure. So again, yeah, I'll just go from, well, I guess page 3, you'll see the breakdown. It's 11 bachelors, 21 bedroom, 22 bedroom. That was the former rent and former workup. So we're not going to look at any more of page 3. My recommendations on page 6, the original model rent was only 77% of the CMHC report analysis for Midland, which is less affected by newer buildings than Centennial is, like those lofts in the exchange. That's not part of the workup here. Still, we're only 77%, and I brought it down from there. And bumped the cap because once you proceed past the cap evidence on 9 and 10, you can start to see the pictures on page 13. And you see the interior of the place. It's pretty beat up. Anyone buying this place, they would realize that they wouldn't be able to get a high level of rent for it, and then they'd have to put money in to, I mean, at the very least, cosmetically fix it up. These are just some photographs we have on file from an inspection I didn't take part of, but from years past. And then there's some notes in regards to a site visit. I don't have a date on this, I don't think. But there was a bunch of work that needed to be done. And I'm just being like transparent with the situation and why I'm putting such a wreck on it. Range at best from poor to get 34 suite interiors range from at best poor condition to many vacant units being an uninhabitable condition. So it looks like this place needs a lot of work done to it, which is why I brought the rents way down and I bumped the cap half a point. So it is an 89, so its bones are newer, but it looks like the interiors would need a ton of work by anyone taking it on. So with my reduction, let me just work this out on a per unit basis for you. So you can have that figure with you as well. So that's 3,782. Oh, sorry. Put that at 54. That's 70 per unit. 1 second. 17,589. 6. You know what? I'll actually put I think it should be a 6 cap now that I'm doing some more review. So I'll drop the assessment to, I'll put a 6 cap on the same NOI of 217,589. And the new evaluation would be 3,625,000. Rounded. I think it should be a 6 cap. That's my presentation. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Barakas, do you have a new NOI for that then, please?
No, it's the same NOI. It's 217,589 or sorry, 489. Then I go divided by 0.06. So it's the same. The NOI is 217,489, which is found on page 7.
All right,
And then I give it a 6 cap, and that's 3.625 rounded.
all right, thank
Based
you.
on condition.
All right,
Thank you.
and thank you very much. And Ms. Cates, are you accepting this new recommendation?
I appreciate the recommendation, but I think I'd just like to proceed with my presentation and leave it in the board's hands.
All right, I thank you. Did you have any questions?
I don't have questions, thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Anderson, any questions?
I have no questions. However, I would note in the agenda that it reflects that the liability and classification is under appeal also.
Oh, thank you. I did not see that. I just saw the,
Madam Chair, we had a hard time hearing what Ms. Anderson said. Could she please repeat that?
Yes, sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
yeah,
In the agenda, it reflects that the liability and classification are also under appeal.
If that's the case, I'm not planning on proceeding on class and liability, so I can withdraw that portion and just proceed on value.
all right. Mrs. Harland, I believe you have, do you have paperwork to proceed
Yes,
with that withdrawal, I believe?
yes. Madam Chair, do we need to stop the proceedings? Are you familiar with this? I've never done this during a hearing before.
No, I don't believe we need to stop because Ms. Cates is saying she's withdrawing it.
Okay, so then to my knowledge, I can get Ms. Cates, the applicant, to fill this out after?
Yes,
Yes, okay, that's what we'll
Great.
do.
all right, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have no questions. Thank you for your presentation.
And thank you, Ms. Anderson, for bringing that up. And Ms. McFadden,
I have no questions.
thank you. So, Mr. Baracus, I just have a question. I'm just going back to your brief here. I just wanted clarification on page 17 of your brief. You've got two pictures.
Yep.
Is that a bathroom that's missing the walls?
Yeah, it looks like they're doing some remediation work in there. So that would be an uninhabitable unit.
All right. Okay, I have no further questions. Thank you. Ms. Cates, if you would like to proceed with your brief.
Thank you. So if you turn to page 2, we have our requested assessment of $3,212,000. On page 4, under scope of work, there was a site visit by a member of our office, including interior and exterior, in August of 2021. On page 6, we have property site maps. And then on page 7, on page 7, we have an exterior photo of the property. Property description on page 8. So the subject property is on the west side of Balmoral, north of its intersection with Ellis in the Spence area. The property is a 6-story building built in the late 80s with 54 units and 35 parking stalls. On page 13, we have the overview of our income approach. So we applied potential market gross rents of $550,133 or $849 per unit per month. We have applied a vacancy rate of 3.6%. And in our review of the expenses, we've applied a dollar amount of $305,477 or 57.6% of effective gross income based on a review of 2 years of expense data and then a 4-year review of repair and maintenance. We have the cap rates for social housing on page 14 and 15, and then the low income tenancy discussion on page 16 and 17. So if you go to page 18, for the subject properties cap rate, we are applying a rather high cap rate to this property of 7%. And going through the features of this property, this location would be considered one of the most challenging locations in the city. And additionally, in regard to the condition, our office collectively in the last couple of years has probably visited close to 100 social housing properties. And this is the worst property that we have seen in terms of just underfunding and condition. So we wanted to make sure that all of those features were properly reflected in this property, which is why we're applying a higher cap rate. I would note that the city's own cap rate ranges go up to past 7.5%. So if any properties would be worthy of a higher cap rate, it would be this one. And I also note on the same page that a 2016 report estimated 3.1 million in capital work. And given the state of underfunding, this amount is likely higher at present date. Additionally, this property has, based on site visit knowledge and talking with the owner, has experienced a number of security incidents where there's constant break-ins leading to quite a bit of damage at the property. On page 19, or sorry, on page 20, we have our income and expense breakdown. So with an NOI of $224,851 and a 7% cap rate, gives an indicated value of $3,212,000 rounded. And I would suggest that the most likely outcome, if someone were to purchase this property, they would probably be looking at it as maybe a little bit more than land value. So I don't really believe a per unit basis for this property would really be like an accurate consideration to look at. Appendix starts on page 23. We have all the site visit photos, so it starts with just some exteriors showing the kind of balcony areas and the back parking area. If you move through page 26, it's like a main floor kind of office area. And then they do have a bit of a recreation room on page 27. Some common area, page 29. And then there's just some photos of the unit. So a variety of units were visited, so you could get a real sense of the condition at the property. And then we have the observation report that I was speaking to regarding the capital quotes. That's on page 49. And then I've also included a news article on page 53 that just speaks to some of the issues at the property. And then the financials that we reviewed. And that would conclude my presentation on this property. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cates. Any questions, Mr. Barakis?
I do not, thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Anderson?
I have no questions. Thank you for your presentation.
And Ms. McFadden?
I have no question.
Okay, thank you. I also have no questions. Does either party have a wish for a summation?
No, thanks.
And Ms. Cates?
I'm good as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So we will move on to our last property, number 8, which is 500 Balmoral Street.
Okay.
And just before we begin, again, there's a wreck on this property, but there's also class and liability.
Madam Chair, sorry, Mr. Assessor, go ahead.
I thought Miss Anderson had referenced it because I don't see it on the,
Last property.
yes, all right, because I don't see it on the agenda. All right, I'm sorry, I thought that's what you had said.
No, just with the last property, it was noted on the agenda.
Yeah. All right, so yes, 500 Balmoral, item 8, Mr. Barakis, if you want to give us your recommendation on this, please.
Yep. File 24-1783, roll number 13051988100, 500 Balmoral. It's not for profit as well. The recommendation is to reduce the total assessment to $4,563,000, and that is based on reducing the ADT co-op component to $3,861,000 and leaving the exempt portion that's not under dispute. The same, page 5, go to the calculations. So I didn't change the net operating income. I just bumped the cap up from 5.15. Having been to this property, I mean, that was a while ago. I think it was like back in 2019. That cap is far too low. So I didn't change the rent because looking at the CMHC rents, we're only 76%. So I bumped the cap quite a bit. I'll just pause there.
All right, I thank you. And Ms. Cates, would you be willing to accept this recommendation?
I feel that the cap rate is still too low at 5.75 for this property, so I would like to proceed. Thank
All
you.
right, I thank you. Mr. Barakis, if you would proceed, please.
Okay. All right, so the on page 3, you've got 12 1-bedroom, 12 2-bedroom, 18 3-bedroom, so decent split. The retail is exempt, so it's not under dispute. The apartment, it's only 977 per unit, which is inclusive of the larger bedroom types as well. So 53% expense ratio as per the model. We got this one pegged down in our model, hence why the rent is so low. Comps are on page 4. You can see the comps in the area are in the 930 range for the most part. But they also have only one of them on Balmoral has 3-bedroom units. We've got predominantly out of all 3-bedroom types, 3-bedroom units. But again, based on the condition of the property having visited, we've got the rent pegged down for a reason. So recommendation calculations again on page 5. The commercial stuff is on page 6, not a dispute. CMHC stuff is on page 7 and 8. You can see we're only 76% Midland rents. Source tables and cap flow through to page 11 on page 13. The new HRV system, new ventilation, new RTU, new structural supports, electrical work to the permit to the tune of 437,000. Other permit in 18, they replaced some concrete pads with mechanical equipment, new fence around equipment, structural and mechanical work. 90,000. And then we've got the exterior of the property. So yeah, it was 2019. So I was there. I took these pictures. So you can see it's pretty dinged up on the inside. But it compared to the last property, it doesn't look quite as bad as the last. Hence why both the applicant and I, we have a lower cap rate than the last property does, even though they're around the same age. This one is more beat. The other one seems to have a deeper rooted issues. So it is interesting to note. While I didn't include the mailers, the commercial components, the commercial expenses are combined with the residential expenses. So if you can't separate them out, you can't really do a site-specific analysis. That and it's being run as a not-for-profit, we just went with the model and I adjusted the cap based on my experience walking through the property and the records. So that's my evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barakis. Ms. Cates, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And Ms. Anderson, any questions?
I have no questions. Thank you.
And Ms. McFadden?
I have no question. Thank you.
I also have no questions. Ms. Cates, if you would like to proceed with your brief, please.
Thank you. So if you turn to page 2, we have our requested assessment. So on the class 80, we have $2,521,000, and on the exempt portion, $702,000, for a total of $3,223,000. On page 6, we have our property maps. Page 7 and 8, some exterior photos. Page 9, property description. So the subject is on the west side of Balmoral between Sargent and Ellis in the Spence area. It is a 7-story building with 42 units, 16 outdoor parking stalls, and the main floor space is used as a daycare and is exempt. Our income approach is on page 14. So we are using rents of $492,781 or $978 per unit per month. Market vacancy of 3.6%. And we are applying an expense allowance of $311,187 or 65.5% of effective gross income. That would typically be our maximum expenses applied at 65%. So sometimes when we're dealing with social housing properties that run higher than that, I will then cap them at 65. And we've looked at 2 years of operating expenses and then 3 years of repair and maintenance. We have the cap rates starting on page 15. If you go to page 19, we have the cap rate for this property. So we are applying a 6.5% cap rate, a bit lower premium than the last one, but taking into account social housing condition factors, limited parking, as well as a location adjustment that would be probably a bit more significant than 0.25%, just given with some of the locational challenges we've already discussed. On page 21, we have our income and expense breakdown. So we are using a net operating income of $163,854 with a 6.5% cap rate, gives an indicated value of $2,521,000 rounded. And while I note the assessor's points that there is some commercial space and it can be harder to fully break out the expenses for both components, at the same time, the property is primarily residential. The commercial space is not a significant proportion of the property. So in terms of trying to, break out utilities or certain other things, the vast majority of that is applying to the residential. So we've just done a consistent approach to how we've done it in previous years. But when we have properties where the commercial is a much larger component, we will then go and attempt to break out those expenses on a proportional basis. We have the repair and maintenance on page 22. And then an appendix starting on page 25. And then I've just included the financials that we've reviewed. And that would conclude my presentation on this property. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cates. Mr. Barakis, did you have any questions?
Would you agree that age is not an issue? Like the building's not that old? Was that a fair comment?
Yes, I mean, the majority of social housing stock was probably built in the 70s or earlier. So when you have stuff in the late 80s, 90s, it would be considered newer. So structurally it's newer, but when you look at the finishes of the units, the age starts to have less meaning. But yes, I agree.
Okay. And just in regards to the commercial, like there's over 5,000 square foot of leasable area. Would you still consider that an insignificant amount overall for a commercial area?
I wouldn't say it's insignificant, but it's not a large portion of the whole property.
Okay, but that area would have expenses attributed to it that are included in your stabilization for the residential, would they not?
Yes, potentially when you're looking at things like utilities, that would be the obvious one. Typically taxes would also be a given, but given that the space is exempt, it wouldn't be the case here. So I always try to break out the taxes because that's fairly straightforward to do. But in terms of utilities, I mean, sure, we could take a little bit out, but we're still going to have an expense ratio that's kind of in the low to mid 60% range. So in our view, for this property, it's not going to change the expenses all that much.
Okay, and then just one last question, just on page 21. It looks like in the most recent year, they spent quite a bit on repair and maintenance. Do you know if that is in regards to renovating the units, or do they fix a whole bunch of them up? Do you have any detail in regards to that, perhaps?
I don't have detail in regard to that specifically when I'm looking at the repair and maintenance charge on page 22. The remaining R and M, where they're not classifying it into any one category, is higher, so I removed that from the analysis. So yeah, the only information I have would be how they've allocated it, so we could see that there's some appliance replacement, some electrical plumbing by the looks of it, but yeah, the remaining R and M, I'm not sure.
Okay, and they're not operating on a for-profit basis, are they?
That's correct.
Okay, those are my questions, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Barakis. Ms. Anderson, did you have any questions?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. McFadden?
I have no questions either. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I have one quick question for you, Ms. Cates. And I'm not sure if you had answered it, but were you in this property, or was somebody from your office in this property?
I wasn't in this property. It is possible that someone from the office may have visited at some point, but I didn't see any photos available to include in the brief.
All right, I thank you. Does either party have a wish for a summation on this property?
I'm okay, thank you.
I'm good as well, thank you.
Okay. Does either party have a wish for an overall summation on this morning's hearing?
No, I'm okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Barakis. And Ms. Cates?
Yeah, I'm good as well, thank you.
Okay. We have heard items 1 through 8 this morning on our docket, and this hearing is now adjourned. And I would just like to thank Mr. Barakis and Ms. Cates for their thorough and interesting briefs. I thank you both, and I hope you have happy holidays and some time off.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
You too, thanks.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'll go take us offline.
Thank you, Mrs. Harland.
Just check the points of revision, please, Sarah. I just want to make sure they're fine.
Good, so I just need to sign.
Yes, please.
Okay. And do I need to check off registered?
Yes, please, if you would agree to.
Carrie, I'm just taking a quick break while she's doing that.
Yes, actually, I was going to say I'd like to take, I don't know, 7 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Thank you.